I sat in that mahogany-paneled office on a gray November morning, the kind of day where the sky over Philadelphia hung so low and heavy it felt like the city itself was mourning. Rain streaked down the tall windows behind the lawyer's desk, blurring the view of Walnut Street below, where people hurried past with their umbrellas bent against the wind. The office smelled of old leather and coffee that had been sitting too long in the pot. I was 32 years old and I'd just buried my mother 3 days earlier. If you've ever sat in a lawyer's office after losing someone you love, wondering what pieces of their life they thought to leave behind for you, hit that like button and subscribe because what I'm about to tell you will make you question everything you thought you knew about the people closest to you. My name is Claire and my mother was everything to me. She raised me alone in our narrow row house in South Philadelphia, the kind with the marble steps she scrubbed every Saturday morning without fail, even in the dead of winter when ice formed in the cracks. I can still hear the sound of her brush against those steps, the rhythmic scraping that was as much a part of my childhood as the bells from St. Monica's Church 2 blocks away. She worked 2 jobs for most of my life, first as a seamstress in a bridal shop on Chestnut Street, where she'd come home with pins stuck in her sleeves and chalk dust on her fingers, and then nights cleaning offices in Center City. I'd wait up for her sometimes, doing my homework at our small kitchen table under the yellow light that flickered when trucks passed by outside, and she'd come through the door smelling like industrial cleaner and exhaustion, but she'd always smile at me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. She never talked about my father. Not once. Whenever I asked as a child, she'd get this distant look in her eyes and change the subject so smoothly I barely noticed until I was older. All I knew was that he'd left before I was born, and that we didn't need him because we had each other. And that was true mostly. We did have each other. Through everything. Through the winter when our heating broke and we slept in the same bed with 3 quilts piled on top of us, our breath visible in the air. Through my awkward teenage years when I was too tall and too quiet and didn't fit in anywhere. Through my college acceptance to Temple University, which made her cry happy tears for the first time I'd ever seen. Through her cancer diagnosis 5 years ago, which we fought together with everything we had, driving to treatments at Penn Medicine while she held my hand and told me stories about her own mother, my grandmother I'd never met who had immigrated from Poland and made the best pierogi in the entire neighborhood. The lawyer sitting across from me now was a man in his 60s named Mr. Berkowitz, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a gentle way of speaking that made this whole terrible process slightly less unbearable. He'd handled my mother's affairs for years, she'd told me, though I'd never met him before today. The office was on the 20th floor of a building downtown, and through those rain-streaked windows, I could see the faint outline of City Hall's tower disappearing into the low clouds. He'd offered me tea when I arrived, which sat cooling in a delicate china cup I was afraid to pick up because my hands wouldn't stop shaking. He opened a folder on his desk, a standard manila folder that looked disappointingly thin, and began reading in that formal, stilted language that legal documents always seem to require. My mother's estate, he explained, was modest. The house on Mercy Street, which she'd finally paid off 2 years before she died. Her savings account, which held $8,342, money she'd scraped together penny by penny over decades. Her car, a 15-year-old Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door from when she'd backed into a pole at the grocery store parking lot. Some jewelry, mostly costume pieces except for one gold locket that had belonged to her mother. And then he paused, looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, and said the words that felt like a slap across the face. And to my daughter Claire I leave my memories. All the moments we shared, all the love I gave her, all the sacrifices I made. These are worth more than any material possession. I stared at him, waiting for more. There had to be more. But he just looked at me with those kind, pitying eyes, and I felt something hot and sharp rise up in my throat. Memories. She'd left me memories. As if I needed a will to tell me I could keep my own memories of her. As if memories could pay for the funeral I'd just put on a credit card I couldn't afford. As if memories could fill the crushing emptiness of that house on Mercy Street where I'd have to go back alone tonight and every night after. I felt anger then, real anger, and it surprised me because I'd never been angry at my mother for anything in my entire life. But sitting in that office with the rain falling and the city gray and cold outside, I felt furious. How could she do this? How could she work herself to the bone for 32 years and have nothing, absolutely nothing, to show for it except $8,000 and a paid-off row house that probably needed a new roof? Mr. Berkowitz was watching me carefully, and I realized my face must have shown everything I was feeling because he cleared his throat gently and said, there's something else. He reached down beside his desk and lifted a second folder onto the surface, but this one was different. It was leather, worn and soft-looking, the kind of portfolio artists use, and it was thick, bulging with contents. It had been sealed with red wax, and pressed into the wax was my mother's signet ring, the one she always wore, a simple silver band with a tiny rose. Your mother left specific instructions, Mr. Berkowitz continued, his voice softer now. This folder was not to be opened until after the will was read and you'd heard that particular bequest. She was very clear about the order. She wanted you to hear about the memories first. He slid the leather folder across the desk to me and I looked down at it like it might bite me. My hands were trembling worse now as I reached for it, my fingers finding the edge of the wax seal. It cracked easily, old and brittle, and fell away in red fragments onto the dark wood of the desk. I opened the folder and what I saw inside made no sense at all. Photographs. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all different sizes, some in color and some in black and white, some new and glossy and some old and faded with scalloped edges. And beneath the photographs, papers. Documents. Letters tied with ribbon. A small velvet box. I pulled out the first photograph and my breath caught in my throat. It was my mother, but not my mother as I'd ever known her. She was young, maybe 20 years old, standing in front of a massive estate that looked like something from a movie. White columns rose up behind her, supporting a portico that shaded a grand entrance with double doors that must have been 12 feet tall. She was wearing a sundress, pale yellow, and her hair was longer than I'd ever seen it, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She was smiling, but there was something in her eyes, something I recognized because I'd seen it my whole life, a kind of sadness she carried like a stone in her pocket. Behind her in the photograph, slightly out of focus, was a fountain, an actual fountain in what looked like a circular driveway, and beyond that, gardens that stretched away into the distance. I pulled out another photograph. My mother again, this time at what looked like a formal party. She was wearing an evening gown, deep emerald green, with her hair swept up, and she was standing next to a man I didn't recognize. He was tall, distinguished-looking, probably in his 50s at the time, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that suggested wealth and power. His hand was on her shoulder, possessive, and she was looking at the camera with that same sad smile. Another photograph. My mother in a different gown, this one black, at what looked like a charity gala with a banner in the background that read Philadelphia Children's Hospital Annual Fundraiser, 1992. Another. My mother sitting in a library, surrounded by floor-to-ceiling shelves of books, reading in a leather chair by a window that let in soft afternoon light. Another. My mother standing in the doorway of what looked like a luxury apartment, the city visible through windows behind her, the skyline of Philadelphia lit up at night. My mother had never lived in a luxury apartment. My mother had lived in our row house on Mercy Street her entire adult life as far as I knew. My mother had never worn evening gowns or attended charity galas. My mother had been a seamstress who cleaned offices at night. Who was this woman in these photographs? I looked up at Mr. Berkowitz, and he must have seen the confusion and shock on my face because he nodded slowly. "Keep going," he said quietly. "She wanted you to know everything." I set the photographs aside, my hands shaking so badly now I could barely control them, and pulled out the first document. It was a birth certificate, mine, but different from the one I'd always had. This one showed a different hospital. A private hospital in Bryn Mawr, one of the wealthy suburbs on the main line. And where the line for father's name had always been blank on the certificate I knew, on this one it read, William Montgomery Harrison III. I stared at that name, at the formal Roman numerals after it, the kind of name that came with money and legacy and everything my childhood had not been. I pulled out another document, a legal document this time, dense with text I could barely parse through the shock, but I caught key phrases. Confidential settlement agreement. Non-disclosure provision. In consideration of $5 million. Full custody granted to Anna Marie Kowalski, my mother's maiden name, the Polish name she'd stopped using when I was born, becoming simply Anna Marie Davis, a name she'd chosen because it was plain and unremarkable and wouldn't stand out. $5 million. The words swam in front of my eyes. I pulled out more papers, bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of, showing deposits and withdrawals over the years, showing a balance that even now, after my mother's death, held over $2 million. Investment portfolios. Property deeds for the row house on Mercy Street, but also for two other properties, a beach house in Cape May, New Jersey, And a condo in a building downtown that I'd walked past 1,000 times, one of those glass towers where units sold for millions. More photographs, these ones harder to look at. My mother with the man from the earlier photos, William Montgomery Harrison III, in intimate settings. Sitting together on a terrace overlooking the ocean. Dancing at what looked like a private party. His arms around her, her head on his shoulder, both of them looking at ease in a way that suggested this was not new, not temporary, but something that had existed for a long time. And then at the bottom of the folder, a letter in my mother's handwriting on her personal stationery, the simple cream-colored note cards she used to write thank you notes and birthday cards. The handwriting was shakier than usual, written recently, probably in her last weeks, but still unmistakably hers. My dearest Claire, it began, and I had to stop reading for a moment because tears were blurring my vision and my chest felt like someone was standing on it. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand and continued. By the time you read this, you'll have seen the photographs and the documents and you'll have questions. So many questions. I know I should have told you all of this while I was alive, but I was a coward. I was afraid of how you'd look at me, afraid you'd think less of me, afraid I'd lose the one pure and perfect thing in my life, which was your love and your respect. But you deserve the truth, and I'm hoping that even though I'm not there to explain it to you, to hold your hand through this, you'll understand, or at least try to understand why I made the choices I made. I met your father when I was 19 years old. I was working as a server at a private club in Gladwine, one of those places where memberships cost more than most people make in a year. I was young and naive and stupid, and he was sophisticated and charming and so different from anyone I'd ever met in South Philadelphia. He was married, Claire. I knew it from the start, but I told myself it didn't matter because we were in love, real love, the kind you read about in books. And maybe we were, in our way. It lasted for 7 years before I got pregnant with you. 7 years of living in the shadows, of being taken care of financially but never being able to claim him publicly, never being able to have a real life with him. I lived in that apartment you saw in the photographs, the one he paid for, and I went to events with him when his wife was out of town, and I wore beautiful clothes and pretended I was someone I wasn't. When I got pregnant, everything changed. His wife had known about me apparently for years, but she'd looked the other way as long as I stayed invisible. Baby made me visible. Baby made me a threat. The settlement agreement you found was the price of my silence and my disappearance. I took the money, Claire. I took every penny of it because I knew I needed to give you the life you deserved, and I knew your father never would. The terms were clear. I could never contact him again. You could never know who he was. If I violated the agreement, I'd lose everything, including custody of you, because he had lawyers and power and connections that could make me disappear in ways I couldn't fight. So I moved back to South Philadelphia, to the neighborhood where I grew up, and I bought the house on Mercy Street with cash, and I put the rest of the money away. And then I made a choice, Claire. I chose to live like I had nothing because I wanted you to grow up normal. I wanted you to understand the value of hard work, to appreciate every small thing we had, to be humble and kind and grateful. I didn't want you to grow up like the children I saw in that world your father came from, entitled and cold and disconnected from reality. So I worked those jobs, real jobs, jobs I took because I wanted them, not because I needed them. The money I earned went into our regular account, the one for groceries and utilities and your school supplies. The settlement money stayed untouched except for emergencies and for building more security for your future. I know this must be confusing and hurtful, and I know you probably feel betrayed. But I need you to understand that every choice I made out of love for you. The memories I mentioned in the will, those are real, Claire. Those are the most valuable thing I have to give you because they were built on genuine sacrifice and genuine joy, on real moments between us that had nothing to do with money or pretense or the complications of the past. But now you also have the financial security to build whatever life you want, to pursue whatever dreams you have without the struggles I faced. There's one more thing. Your father died 2 years ago. I found out through an obituary in the newspaper. His wife passed away 6 months before him. They had no children together, and from what I could piece together from public records, most of his estate went to various charities and distant relatives. He never tried to contact us, never tried to meet you, and for that I'll never forgive him, even though I chose this path. But you have the right to know who you are, where you come from. His family name is in this folder. If you want to learn more about him, about that side of your heritage, you can. Or you can let it go and just move forward with your life. Either choice is okay. I love you more than anything in this world, my darling girl. I'm sorry I couldn't be braver. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you this face to face. But I hope you can forgive me, and I hope you can understand that everything I did because I wanted you to have a better life than I had, a life built on love and authenticity rather than secrets and compromises. All my love forever and always, Mom. I sat in that office for a long time after I finished reading, the letter still in my hands, tears streaming down my face unchecked. Mr. Berkowitz had quietly left the room at some point, giving me privacy, and I was alone with these revelations, with this entire hidden history of my mother's life that explained so much and yet left me with even more questions. The rain had picked up outside, drumming against the windows, and the sky had grown darker even though it was only mid-morning. I thought about my mother scrubbing those marble steps every Saturday, and now I wondered if she'd done it because she needed the routine, the normalcy, the connection to a simpler life she'd chosen over the complicated one she'd left behind. I thought about all those nights she'd come home from cleaning offices, and I realized she'd been choosing that exhaustion, choosing that humble life, because she'd thought it would make me a better person. Maybe it had. I'd grown up grateful for everything. I'd worked hard in school because I knew education mattered. I'd been kind to people because I'd seen my mother treat everyone with dignity, from the wealthiest bride in the bridal shop to the janitor working alongside her in those office buildings at night. I'd learned to appreciate small joys, a good meal, a warm home, time spent together, because those were the things my mother had valued and taught me to value. But she'd also made me watch her struggle when she didn't have to, and I didn't know yet how I felt about that, whether it was the ultimate sacrifice or the ultimate deception. Mr. Berkowitz came back into the room eventually, carrying a fresh cup of tea for me and a box of tissues. He sat down across from me again and folded his hands on his desk, waiting until I'd composed myself enough to meet his eyes. "Your mother wanted me to tell you a few more things," he said gently. "Things she couldn't write in the letter. The first is that she never regretted her choices, not for a single day. She told me that the year before she died, when she knew the cancer was winning and we were putting all of this together, she said raising you was the greatest joy and privilege of her life, and that every moment of it was real and true regardless of the financial circumstances underneath. The second thing is that she set everything up so you'd be taken care of, but also so you'd have the freedom to choose your own path. The properties are in your name now, all paid off, no mortgages or liens. You can live in any of them, sell any of them, keep them as investments, whatever you want. The accounts are yours, structured in a way that's tax efficient and protected. You have financial advisors waiting to meet with you whenever you're ready, people your mother vetted carefully. You're not just secure, Claire. You're wealthy. You never have to work a day in your life if you don't want to, or you can use the resources to do something meaningful, to build something, to help people the way your mother always wanted to help people but felt she couldn't while maintaining the life she'd chosen for you." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet, and he continued. "The third thing is about your father. Your mother left you all the information she had about him, about his family, about his life. It's in a separate envelope in the folder. But she also wanted me to tell you that you're under no obligation to explore any of it. The settlement agreement ended with your mother's death. You're free to contact the Harrison family if you want, to let them know you exist, to claim any kind of relationship or acknowledgement. But you're also free to walk away from it entirely. That's entirely your choice, and there's no wrong answer." The Harrison family. I turned the name over in my mind, this family I belonged to by blood but had never known existed. William Montgomery Harrison III. Were there other Harrisons? Aunts, uncles, cousins? Did they know about me, or had my existence been scrubbed from family history along with my mother's? And did I even want to know? Did I want to open that door and invite in all the complications and potential rejections that might come with it? I didn't know. I couldn't think about it yet. It was all too much, too big, too overwhelming. I left Mr. Berkowitz's office that afternoon with the leather folder tucked under my arm, protected from the rain by a plastic sleeve he'd provided. I walked down Walnut Street in a daze, barely noticing the cold or the wet or the people hurrying past me. I walked all the way back to South Philadelphia to the house on Mercy Street, those marble steps I'd climbed a million times, the narrow brick facade that looked exactly like the houses on either side of it. I unlocked the door and stepped inside into the smell that was still my mother's smell, lavender and coffee and something indefinable that was just her. The house felt different now, though. It felt like a stage set, a carefully constructed narrative rather than the simple truth I'd always believed it to be. I spent the rest of that day and most of that night going through the folder more carefully, examining every photograph, reading every document, trying to piece together the full picture of my mother's life before me and during my childhood. There were photographs of my mother pregnant with me, her hand on her belly, standing in front of that apartment window with the city lights behind her, looking simultaneously happy and terrified. There were receipts from expensive restaurants and shops, proof of the life she'd lived in that other world. There were letters, a few of them from my father to my mother, written in a bold, confident hand, saying things like, "I miss you," and "You look beautiful tonight," and "I wish things could be different." Hollow words from a man who'd never been willing to sacrifice anything real for the woman he claimed to love. And there were photographs of me as a baby, as a toddler, as a young child, but these weren't the ones from our family albums. These were different, professional shots, the kind taken at expensive portrait studios, and in some of them my mother was wearing the kinds of clothes I'd never seen her in, designer outfits that must have been from that earlier life. She'd had two lives, I realized. The public one she'd built for me and the private one she'd maintained in secret, keeping the money safe, keeping the connections to my father's world documented and preserved, just in case I ever needed them or wanted them. In the following weeks, I began the process of sorting through everything. I met with the financial advisors my mother had chosen, serious people in nice offices who treated me with a respect I wasn't used to, who called me Miss Davis and walked me through investment strategies and tax implications and trust structures. I learned that my mother had been quietly donating to charities for years, tens of thousands of dollars annually, to causes that mattered to her, children's hospitals and education funds and services for working families. I learned that she'd set up a scholarship fund at Temple University in my name that would provide full tuition for 4 students every year in perpetuity. She'd been doing good with the money, using it in ways that aligned with her values, even while living modestly herself. I visited the beach house in Cape May on a cold December afternoon, driving down the Garden State Parkway in my mother's old Civic because I wasn't ready yet to buy something new, wasn't ready yet to fully step into this other life. The house was beautiful, a classic shore cottage painted pale blue with white trim, sitting just 2 blocks from the beach. Inside it was furnished simply but elegantly, with comfortable furniture and nautical touches and windows that let in the winter light. My mother had come here, I realized. Maybe not often, but sometimes. There was a closet in the master bedroom with some of her clothes in it, summer dresses and sandals and a sun hat. There were books on the shelves, novels with her bookmarks still in them. She'd had this retreat, this place to breathe and be herself without the performance of poverty she'd maintained in Philadelphia, and she'd never told me about it, never invited me here, because it would have broken the illusion she'd worked so hard to create. I cried a lot in those weeks. I cried for my mother and for the burden she'd carried alone all those years. I cried for myself and for the strange sense of betrayal I felt, even though I understood intellectually why she'd done what she'd done. I cried for what could have been, if my father had been a different kind of man, if my mother had been a different kind of woman, if the world worked differently than it does. But eventually, slowly, I started to feel something else too. Gratitude. Not for the money, though that was certainly life-changing, but for the intention behind it all. My mother had loved me enough to sacrifice her own comfort, her own ease, to give me something she thought was more valuable than wealth. She'd given me character, resilience, empathy, humility. She'd given me a childhood where I'd felt loved and safe and where hard work and kindness mattered more than status or possessions. The question of my father, of the Harrison family, haunted me through the holidays. I spent Christmas alone in the house on Mercy Street, my first Christmas without my mother, surrounded by decorations we'd put up together for years. I pulled out the envelope Mr. Berkowitz had mentioned, the one with information about my father's family, and I finally opened it. Inside was a family tree, professionally printed, showing generations of Harrisons going back to the early 1800s. My father had been an only child, but his parents had both come from large families, which meant I had great aunts and great uncles, second cousins, a whole network of relatives I'd never met. There was also a printout of my father's obituary from the Philadelphia Inquirer. William Montgomery Harrison III, philanthropist and businessman, died peacefully at his home in Gladwine after a brief illness. He was 73. Mr. Harrison was the president of Harrison Industries, a manufacturing company founded by his grandfather. He served on the boards of numerous charitable organizations and was known for his generous support of the arts. He is survived by several nieces and nephews. No mention of a daughter. No mention of my mother. 7 years of my mother's life, erased from his official history as if they'd never happened. I stared at his photograph in the obituary, this older version of the man I'd seen in my mother's photos, and I tried to feel some connection to him, some sense of loss or curiosity or even anger. But I felt nothing. He was a stranger, a man who'd made choices that had shaped my life without ever knowing me, without ever wanting to know me. And I realized I didn't need anything from him or from his family. I didn't need their acknowledgement or their acceptance or their history. I had my own history, the one my mother and I had built together on Mercy Street, in our row house with the marble steps, in our small genuine life that had been richer than I'd ever known. But I did make one decision. I decided to learn more about him, not to claim him or his legacy, but to understand that part of myself, the genetic inheritance that shaped who I was whether I acknowledged it or not. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, to compile information about the Harrison family, about their business, about my father's life. What I learned surprised me. William Montgomery Harrison III had not been the powerful figure I'd imagined. Harrison Industries had been struggling for years, eventually sold off to a larger corporation when my father was in his 60s. The family's wealth, once substantial, had dwindled considerably. The estate in the photographs, the one with the columns and the fountain, had been sold 20 years ago. My father had lived comfortably but not extravagantly in his later years, in a nice but not exceptional house in Gladwine, maintained by what remained of his inheritance and some smart investments. And I learned something else, something that changed how I understood everything. My father had tried to contact my mother once. It was in the investigator's report, discovered through old phone records and a brief mention in some papers found in my father's estate. 3 years after I was born, he'd called the number my mother had at the time, the house on Mercy Street. He'd called multiple times over the course of a week. My mother had never mentioned it, never told me, and I'd never known. Had she refused to talk to him, honoring the settlement agreement? Or had she talked to him and decided that whatever he'd had to say wasn't enough, wasn't worth complicating the life she was building for me? I'd never know. But it made him slightly more human to me, slightly less of a villain, knowing that he'd at least tried, even if it was too little and far too late. By spring, I'd made decisions about my own life. I quit my job as a middle school teacher, a job I'd loved but that had been draining me in ways I hadn't fully acknowledged until I had the freedom to step back. I kept the house on Mercy Street because it was home, because it held every memory I truly valued. I sold the condo downtown and the beach house in Cape May, because they were my mother's escapes, not mine, and I needed to build my own life rather than inherit hers. I used some of the money to pay off the student loans I'd been carrying since college. I used more of it to expand the scholarship fund my mother had started, broadening it to include students from South Philadelphia specifically, kids like I'd been who worked hard but needed help to reach their potential. And I started a project my mother would have loved. I used the house in South Philadelphia, the row house on Mercy Street, to create a community center. I worked with architects to carefully renovate it, preserving the historic character while making it accessible and functional. The ground floor became a homework help center and after-school program for neighborhood kids. The second floor became a resource center for working families, offering resume help, job training, financial literacy classes, all the things my mother had navigated alone but that could be easier with support. I lived in a renovated third-floor apartment, smaller than the full house had been but enough for me, and I poured myself into this work, into honoring my mother's values in a way that felt authentic and meaningful. The first day the center opened, in late May when the weather had finally turned warm and the marble steps out front gleamed in the sunlight, scrubbed clean by a service I'd hired because I couldn't bear to do it myself, I stood on the sidewalk and looked up at the building. There was a small bronze plaque beside the door that read, "The Anna Marie Davis Community Center, in memory of a mother who gave everything." A line of families waited to come in, excited to see what we'd created, and I felt a presence beside me that I knew wasn't real but felt real anyway. My mother, young and healthy, the way she'd been before the cancer, before the exhaustion of maintaining 2 lives had worn her down. She was smiling at me, that genuine smile I'd seen in the photographs from before I was born, before everything got complicated, and I knew somehow that she was proud. I never contacted the Harrison family. I thought about it sometimes, wondered if any of them knew I existed, if my father had ever told anyone about me, if there were cousins out there somewhere who might want to know they had a relative they'd never met. But I let it go. That part of my heritage was just biology, just circumstance. My real family was the one my mother had created, the community she'd been part of, the life she'd built through her choices, good and complicated as they were. I was Claire Davis, daughter of Anna Marie Davis, a woman who'd loved me enough to live a double life, to carry secrets that must have weighed on her every single day, to sacrifice her own truth so I could grow up with what she believed was a better truth. The folder, the leather portfolio that had changed everything, sits on a shelf in my apartment now. I look at it sometimes, at the photographs of my mother in her evening gowns and her other life, and I try to reconcile that woman with the mother I knew, the one who wore practical clothes and sensible shoes and worked long hours at unglamorous jobs. But they're the same person, I've come to understand. Both versions were real. Both versions were my mother. She contained multitudes, as we all do, and she made the choices she thought were right with the information and resources she had, in a world that didn't give her many good options. The memories she left me in the will, the ones that seemed like such a cruel joke at first, have become what I value most. The memory of her laugh when I'd say something unexpectedly funny at dinner. The memory of her hands braiding my hair before school, her fingers gentle and sure. The memory of her sitting beside my bed when I was sick, reading to me for hours, her voice soft and soothing. The memory of her crying happy tears at my college graduation, hugging me so tight I could barely breathe. Those memories are real in a way that money and property and social status never could be. They're the proof of her love, the evidence of a life well lived, not in terms of wealth or success, but in terms of devotion and sacrifice and the quiet, persistent work of raising a child to be a good human being. I'm 33 now, a year older than when I sat in that lawyer's office and had my entire understanding of my life upended. I've used the wealth my mother left me to build something that matters, something that helps people, something that would make her proud. I've forgiven her for the deception because I've come to understand that love sometimes looks like secrets kept for the right reasons. I've accepted that I'll never fully understand everything she went through, every choice she made, every moment she wanted to tell me the truth but held back. But I know she loved me with every fiber of her being, and that knowledge, that memory, is the real inheritance she left me, more valuable than any amount of money could ever be. On the anniversary of her death, I visit her grave at Holy Cross Cemetery, bringing fresh flowers and sitting on the grass beside her headstone. It's a simple marker, nothing elaborate, with her name and dates and a line I chose. She gave everything. I tell her about the community center, about the families we've helped, about the scholarship students who are thriving at Temple. I tell her I understand now, or at least I'm trying to understand why she did what she did. I tell her I forgive her and I thank her, and I promise her that I'll honor her memory not by living the life she lived, but by living the life she wanted for me. One built on authenticity and compassion and the understanding that wealth means nothing if it doesn't serve something larger than ourselves. And sometimes, in the quiet moments when I'm alone in my apartment above the community center, with the sounds of the neighborhood drifting up through the windows, the same sounds that filled my childhood, I open that leather folder and look at the photographs of my mother in her 2 lives. And I whisper to her across the distance between life and death, between truth and secrets, between the woman she was and the mother she chose to be. I tell her I love her, and I tell her I understand, and I tell her that the memories she left me were enough, were everything, were the most precious gift anyone could ever give. Because in the end, that's what remains. Not money or property or family names or social status. Just love and the memories we build with the people who matter most, and the choices we make about who we want to be in this world. And my mother, in all her complexity and contradiction, taught me that better than anyone ever could. If you stayed with me through this entire journey, through every revelation and every emotion, I'm grateful you were here. Stories like these, the ones that peel back the layers of what we think we know about the people closest to us, they remind us that everyone carries something we can't see. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think differently about your own family or your own life, I'd really appreciate if you take a second to hit that like button. It helps more people find these stories and connect through them. And if you made it all the way to the end, leave a comment saying, "Memories are the real inheritance," so I know you were here with me through all of it. There's another story waiting for you, one that might surprise you just as much as this one did, so go ahead and click on the next video. Sometimes the stories we need to hear find us exactly when we're ready for them. I'll see you there.